This podcast by Mythic Vibes AI is created for educational and informational purposes only. It's based on publicly available research and creative analysis, and does not represent any government or organization. All visuals and sounds are licensed, royalty-free, or AI-generated. Some scenes are dramatized for storytelling.
Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're the podcast where we really drill down into complex topics, trying to extract the knowledge you need to be genuinely well-informed.
And today, well, we've got a colossal task ahead of us.
We certainly do. We're attempting to trace, 4 millennia of China's continuous civilization?
That's right. But we're not just, walking along a timeline. We're tracking the evolution of a single, incredibly powerful idea, a defining idea, really.
And what is that idea?
It's this persistent belief that order brings harmony. It's fundamental.
Okay.
For China, historically and today, chaos, fragmentation, these are seen as truly existential threats.
Right.
So the purpose of governance, whether you're looking at ancient emperors or the modern Communist Party, it's always been about establishing and maintaining this overarching centralized order.
Politically, socially, economically.
Exactly, because that's seen as the only path, the only way to collective prosperity, to stability.
So that's our mission today. We're tracing this cycle, right?
Yeah.
The constant push-pull between order and disorder.
Uh-huh. From the breakdown of ancient dynasties through these amazing bursts of creativity, like in medieval times.
All the way up to the modern-day struggles, like reforming those huge state-controlled industries, the commanding heights, and, of course, the race for technological leadership.
It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? When you look at, say, Western history, you tend to see these distinct breaks. Rome falls, then feudalism, the Renaissance, kind of separate chapters.
Yeah, it's continuous.
But in the Chinese view, history is much more cyclical. It's seen as this relentless pattern within one unbroken civilization.
So periods of destruction, civil war, they aren't the end of the story.
Not at all. They're seen almost as temporary phases, necessary, perhaps, before the inevitable reunification.
Like a spring coiling and uncoiling you mentioned before.
Precisely. And there's that famous opening line from The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the classic novel.
Oh, right. How does it go again?
It is a truth universally acknowledged that everything long united will fall apart.
And everything long divided will come back together again. It perfectly captures that cyclical view. The system always wants to return to the center.
And when it does come back together, the results can be absolutely astounding. We're going to delve into periods like the Song Renaissance, which honestly was miles ahead of contemporary Europe in terms of inventiveness, urban life.
And then we'll connect that same drive, that same impulse for centralized excellence to the modern push, the ambition to be the defining global superpower of this century.
It's a story of extraordinary persistence, of continuity, but also, let's be frank, of the complex and often quite ruthless methods used over millennia to define power, centralize it, and keep hold of it across huge territories and shifting ideologies.
Okay, let's dive in. Where should we start this quest for order? Let's anchor it right at the beginning, the earliest foundations of Chinese governance.
Well, archaeology points towards this Xia dynasty, often dated around 2100 BCE. It's partly legendary, partly historical.
But it represents that first idea of a centralized Chinese state.
Exactly. It plants the seed for this fundamental assumption. Rule should flow from a single center.
Okay.
But it's really the Zhou dynasty, which comes next and lasts a very long time, from about 1046 BCE to 256 BCE, that gives this idea its political and philosophical backbone.
This is where the mandate of heaven comes in, right? Tianming.
Precisely. This is probably the single most important political principle to grasp. It's what grants the ruler legitimacy.
But it wasn't automatic, was it? Not like the divine right of kings in Europe.
Not at all. That's the crucial difference. It was fiercely conditional. The ruler, the son of heaven, only had the mandate as long as he governed justly.
And crucially, retained the confidence of the people.
Yes. If he became incompetent or immoral or tyrannical, he effectively forfeited the mandate.
And then, revolution. Dynastic collapse.
It wasn't just predictable in that case. It was seen as essentially justified. Heaven had withdrawn its blessing because the ruler failed the people.
So heaven gives the legitimacy, but the people are kind of the barometer. Yeah. Their satisfaction shows if the mandate holds.
You could put it that way. But how do the people enforce that against a powerful emperor with armies? It wasn't always outright revolution, of course, but the threat was always there. The philosophers understood that constant rebellion wasn't the cause of the mandate being lost, it was the symptom that it had already been lost. They warned rulers constantly. You see it in ancient texts like the Book of Odes. There's a line. Take warning from the house of Shang. The great decree is not easily preserved.
So ultimately, sovereignty kind of rests on the people's perception of good governance, lose their confidence.
And you will eventually fall. Chaos follows. Order must be restored.
And this Zhou period, this foundational era, also saw that explosion of ideas, the 100 schools of thought.
An incredible intellectual ferment. And two schools in particular would shape Chinese governance for the next 2,000 years, often in tension with each other: Confucianism and Legalism.
Let's start with Confucius, Master Kong. His focus was order
through moral purity, social ritual, ethical conduct. What's really interesting about Confucius is his deliberate agnosticism.
Agnosticism, in what sense?
He consciously avoided metaphysics. He didn't speculate much about the gods or the afterlife. His entire focus was on this world, on human conduct, sincerity, proper relationships, and good government.
Grounded in practical ethics, then. How should people behave? How should rulers lead?
Exactly. The ruler needed to be an eminence of model behavior. The idea was that good conduct would flow downwards, through prestige, through example, creating a moral order in society.
Okay, moral example. Now contrast that with legalism.
Legalism is the polar opposite in many ways. It's the ultimate pragmatic, maybe even cynical philosophy of power.
How so?
Legalists basically said, moral example, nice idea, but it's unreliable. People are fundamentally self-interested.
So appeals to virtue won't work.
Not consistently. Order, they argued, must be enforced through strict, clear laws, absolute authority, and unquestioning obedience. The ruler's personal virtue, irrelevant.
Wow. The state as a machine, demanding obedience.
Precisely. Humans are motivated by reward and punishment, full stop. So you need a system of harsh penalties and clear rewards.
Governance by moral example versus governance by iron fist. You can see how these two would clash.
Oh, absolutely. Or, perhaps more often in Chinese history, how they would fuse uneasily with rulers trying to balance the structure of legalism with the moral legitimacy of Confucianism.
And that clash, or maybe that initial dominance of one side, happened pretty quickly with the first truly unified empire, right? The Qin.
Yes. After centuries of absolute chaos, the warring states period, brutal stuff, the state of Qin finally conquered everyone else. And its leader, Qin Shi Huang, adopted legalism as the official, non-negotiable operating system for his new empire.
Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor Huangdi, the man who literally forged China into a coherent entity. His achievements sound immense and fast.
Immense, rapid, and utterly ruthless. His first priority was infrastructure and standardization, the bedrock of centralized control.
What kind of standardization?
Everything. Weights, measures, currency, even the axle widths of carts, so that all roads could function efficiently across the vast new empire.
Smart. Logistics matter.
Crucially, he standardized the writing system, creating one script, forcing everyone to use it. This single shared method of communication arguably outlasted everything else. It's maybe his longest-lasting legacy, allowing bureaucratic continuity despite dynastic changes.
And the Great Wall, he started that too.
He began the massive project of linking existing walls and extending them. Initially, it was probably less about pure defense, though, that was part of it, and more a huge symbolic statement.
Defining China.
Exactly. Defining the boundary between the civilized, ordered world inside and the barbarians outside. A psychological line as much as a physical one.
But that legalist rule.
It was absolute.
Absolute.
Yeah.
Qin Shi Huang believed unity required total obedience, intellectual dissent. That was a direct threat to order.
Which led to the infamous burning of books. He ordered the destruction of texts that contained alternative histories or, significantly, Confucian philosophy that challenged his absolute authority.
And worse.
And, chillingly, the historical accounts say he buried hundreds, maybe 460 Confucian scholars alive.
That's a statement.
It's a brutal demonstration of that fundamental conflict.
Yep.
For the legalist state machine, Confucian ideas about moral leadership, about questioning authority based on ethics, that was poison. It undermined the very basis of centralized, unquestionable power.
And we can still see the physical evidence of this power today, can't we? The terracotta army.
Yes. An astonishing find. We see the pictures, those 8,000 life-sized warriors. It's easy to think they're just symbolic, ceremonial.
But they weren't. You mentioned they were armed, like really armed.
Fully armed. Not with replicas, but with real, lethal, sharpened, war-grade bronze weapons. The archaeologists found them.
What kind of weapon?
Things designed for the battlefield. Specialized anti-cavalry weapons, like the G, which is a type of halberd, and advanced crossbows, apparently designed with interchangeable parts for mass production.
Mass production. So the engineering wasn't just the statues, it was logistics of arming an underground army.
Precisely. It wasn't just sculpting 8,000 unique faces. It was equipping them for actual combat. It speaks volumes about the Qin state's capacity for mobilization.
And the human cost. Where did the labor come from?
Conscripted labor, mostly. The sources mention this worker, Bu Gongju, forced into labor to pay off debts he owed the government. Millions must have been involved in these massive projects. The army, the wall, the roads, the canals.
It's pure legalism in action, isn't it?
Yeah.
Central planning, mobilizing every resource, human or otherwise, for the state's goal, order, and unity. Ethics don't enter into it.
That's the model. And while the Qin dynasty itself burned out very quickly, just 15 years.
Right. Too brittle. Too harsh.
Perhaps. But the structure he created, the centralized bureaucracy, the standardized systems that survived, the subsequent Han dynasty, which lasted for centuries, cleverly adopted the Qin administrative framework, but overlaid it with a revived Confucianism for moral legitimacy. That blend proved much more durable.
Okay, so the Han created a lasting model. But as you said, the cycle always turns. Fast forward several centuries, past the Tang dynasty's golden age.
Which eventually faded, leading to another period of fragmentation and chaos in the early 10th century. One poet, Wang Renu, described it as just utterly desolate. We're talking something like 16 different dynasties popping up and collapsing in just 50 years. Total disunity.
Low point of the cycle again, the mandate withdrawn.
Absolutely. But out of that chaos, eventually, the Song dynasty emerges around 960 CE. They announce a new order is here. And they don't just reunite China, they kind of fundamentally rethink what Chinese civilization could be.
Leading to what we call the Song Renaissance.
Exactly. And the heart of this new world was their capital city, Kaifeng.
Which wasn't a traditional capital, was it?
No, it started as a provincial backwater. But they transformed it into arguably the greatest, most vibrant city on earth at the time. We're talking over 1 million people. It completely eclipsed anything happening in Europe then.
What made it so different, so advanced?
Well, beyond the incredible technological innovation, metallurgy, engineering, shipbuilding, gunpowder weapons.
Which we'll get to.
It was the sheer modernity of the lifestyle. Think about earlier capitals like Chang'an during the Tang dynasty. It was grand, but rigidly planned. A grid system.
Orderly.
Very orderly, but also very closed. Walled-off market areas, strict segregation between residential and commercial zones, and critically, an enforced curfew at night.
So order imposed physically. You couldn't just wander around after dark.
Exactly. Kaifeng was the opposite. It was an open city, shops spilled out onto the streets, blending with houses. You had specialized restaurants catering to all sorts of tastes, tea houses, entertainment districts.
You mentioned fast food.
The sources mention it. Pre-prepared meals sold quickly to people on the go. It speaks to a bustling, commercially vibrant urban life. And maybe the biggest indicator of this shift...
No curfew.
No curfew at all. People were out and about at all hours. That suggests a level of social trust, economic dynamism, maybe just a feeling of safety and freedom that was unthinkable in earlier imperial capitals.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And this dynamism fueled growth.
Massive population growth. During the Song era, the population of China basically doubled from maybe 100 million around the year 1000 to possibly 200 million by the 1200s.
200 million people, that's staggering for the time. A huge chunk of the world's population.
Easily a third, maybe more, living within this single sophisticated civilization.
And how was this massive society governed? Was it just the emperor?
Well, the Song refined and really expanded the civil service examination system. This was crucial.
Making government positions based on merit, not just birth.
Increasingly so. It made social mobility genuinely possible, at least in theory, for talented individuals even from non-elite backgrounds. If you could study and pass these incredibly difficult exams based on classical texts.
You could get a government job, gain status.
Exactly. It wasn't just about finding competent bureaucrats. It was about ensuring the governing class shared a common cultural and ethical framework, grounded in Confucian classics. They needed people with good character.
And with a large, relatively wealthy urban population with leisure time, They needed entertainment.
They certainly did. And this is where we see the rise of a really fascinating spectator sport. Kuju.
Kickball.
Essentially, yes. But this wasn't just a casual kickabout in the park. This was serious, organized stuff.
Like professional football today.
Getting there, you had professional clubs, stars, managers, written handbooks detailing rules and tactics, and huge crowds of fans.
And the game itself, what was it like?
Apparently quite technical. The goal wasn't a wide net. It was a small hole in a net suspended maybe 10 meters off the ground. Required incredible skill to score.
Wow. But the really unique part was the ethics, wasn't it? The Confucian influence.
This is wonderful, yes. The rules weren't just about how to play, they were about how to behave. Professional fouls, like deliberately tripping an opponent, that was deemed un-Confucian.
Un-Confucian. You'd get penalized for bad ethics.
Apparently so. And arguing with the referee, that showed a lack of moral rectitude, a failure of the self-control expected of a civilized sportsman.
That's amazing. It shows just how deeply that ideal of moral order permeated the culture, even down to popular sports.
And this whole era was just an engine of technological innovation. We mentioned metallurgy, gunpowder, but let's talk about printing.
Right. The Song Dynasty saw a boom in publishing.
Absolutely massive. Thousands of books became available, huge encyclopedias, technical manuals, poetry collections, histories, even self-help guides. Literacy spread well beyond the traditional aristocratic elite.
And this was possible because of printing technology. China was already ahead here, right?
Yeah, way ahead. They'd invented woodblock printing back in the Tang Dynasty. You carve a whole page onto a block of wood, ink it, and press it onto paper.
Efficient for making many copies of the same page.
Exactly. But then, during the Song, around 1040 CE, an artisan named Bisheng took the next logical step. He invented movable type.
Movable type. Centuries before Gutenberg in Europe.
Centuries before. He made individual characters out of baked clay, set them in an iron frame, inked them, and printed. Then you could break up the frame and reuse the characters.
That sounds revolutionary. That should have changed everything, just like it did in Europe.
You'd think so. But here's the great paradox, the fascinating twist. Movable type, despite being invented in China, never really took off there in a big way. They largely stuck with woodblocks.
Why? That seems counterintuitive. It's a superior technology, isn't it?
In some contexts, yes. But it all came down to the economics and logistics of the Chinese writing system itself.
How so?
Think about Gutenberg. He was working with the Latin alphabet. You have 26 letters, uppercase and lowercase, numbers, punctuation, maybe 100 or so unique pieces of type needed for a print shop. Manageable.
Okay. And for Chinese?
To print a typical book or document, you need thousands of unique characters. Even for a basic newspaper, you'd need maybe 3,000 to 4,000 different characters readily available.
Wow. Okay, I see the problem. Setting a page would be incredibly complex.
Imagine the typesetter searching through thousands of tiny compartments to find each specific character one by one to compose a single page. Then, after printing, having to sort all those thousands of pieces back into the correct slots. The setup time and the risk of error were enormous.
Compared to woodblock.
With woodblock, yes, the initial carving of the page was labor-intensive and costly. But once you had the block, you could print thousands of copies relatively quickly and cheaply. Composition was essentially zero. The page was already set.
And since many classic texts remained popular for centuries,
the investment in carving a set of woodblocks made long-term economic sense. It was often just more efficient, less cumbersome, and ultimately cheaper than managing a massive, unwieldy collection of movable type pieces for each print run.
So the sheer complexity of the language, the very thing Qin Shi Huang standardized to unify the empire, ironically acted as a brake on adopting this potentially revolutionary printing technology.
It's a perfect example of how innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It has to fit the existing infrastructure, the economic realities, the cultural context. What works brilliantly in one place might just not be practical in another.
So the Song Renaissance, with all its brilliance, eventually faded. The cycle turned downwards again. We had the Yuan Dynasty, the Mongols.
Then the Ming, then the Qing, each restoring centralized order after periods of upheaval, each facing its own challenges.
But as we move closer to the modern era, into the 19th and early 20th centuries, something seems to break more fundamentally. That ancient continuity, the mandate of heaven. It really starts to fracture, doesn't it?
It does. The 19th century, for the Qing dynasty, was just catastrophic. Imperial decline, massive internal rebellions like the Taiping, increasing pressure, and military defeats by foreign powers. The Opium Wars.
The century of humiliation.
That's how it's remembered. The people's confidence in the imperial system was utterly shattered. The mandate was clearly withdrawn, but unlike previous cycles, no single strong figure or new dynasty emerged quickly to claim it and restore order effectively.
Instead, you got warlords, fragmentation,
Decades of chaos and national humiliation. The old imperial system, which had worked for millennia, simply failed to cope with the pressures of the modern world and internal decay.
and that failure, that long, painful period of disorder, surely created a vacuum, didn't it? An opening for a new, radical idea to promise the stability and strength that the old ways couldn't deliver.
Absolutely. It set the stage perfectly for the rise of communism.
So the communist victory in 1949 wasn't just a military event. It tapped into that deep desire for order after decades of chaos.
Very much so. The revolution was the culmination of all that violence and instability. While the reasons are complex, popular support did shift decisively towards Mao Zedong and the communists.
Why? What was their appeal compared to the nationalists, the KMT?
A big part of it was the perception of the nationalists. They were seen by many as corrupt, inefficient, and brutal in suppressing dissent.
Whereas the communists offered.
They offered radical change. They had a reputation, especially among the peasantry, for effective land reform in the areas they controlled. And critically, they were seen as having fought more effectively against the Japanese invasion during World War II. They projected strength and purpose.
So they promised order, justice, and national dignity.
Precisely. When Mao declared in 1949 that the Chinese people had stood up, it resonated deeply. Power was centralized once more, this time under the banner of Marxist-Leninist ideology, promising liberation, equality, and a complete break with the humiliating past.
But that promise, that pursuit of ideological purity, contained its own dangers, didn't it? A paradox emerged.
A tragic paradox, yes. It became horrifyingly clear about 2 decades later with the start of the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution in 1966.
This wasn't a revolution against an old enemy. It was Mao turning on his own system.
In a way, yes. Mao seemed to fear that the revolutionary spirit was fading. He worried that the Communist Party bureaucracy itself, the very government he had created, was becoming rigid, maybe even bourgeois, that it was prioritizing stability and routine over perpetual class struggle.
Betraying the revolution in his eyes.
Exactly. And to prevent that, to purge these perceived counter-revolutionary influences and reignite the ideological fire, he decided chaos was necessary.
Chaos by design, unleashing the youth.
He mobilized millions of young students, forming the Red Guards, and basically told them to bombard the headquarters, to rebel against authority figures, teachers, intellectuals, party officials, even their own parents if they represented the old ways.
The results were devastating, weren't they?
Utterly devastating. The sources describe it as one of the most chaotic and traumatic periods in modern Chinese history. The goal might have been ideological purification, but the reality was intense factional violence. The destruction of cultural heritage, public denunciations, persecution. It turned society upside down.
Neighbor against neighbor, you said.
Yes, teacher against student, children against parents. The historian Liu Jianhong talks about China's dream being never to be dominated again, but the Cultural Revolution was a form of internal domination imposed from the very top, leading to immense suffering, millions of deaths, and deep psychological scars.
It's a stark illustration, isn't it? Even when the stated goal is liberation, the drive for absolute conformity, for total ideological order, can concentrate terrifying, destructive power in one person's hands.
And the sheer disaster of the Cultural Revolution, the trauma, the economic stagnation, eventually forced a major rethink. It became clear that ideological purity alone couldn't build a modern nation or feed 1 billion people.
And out of that wreckage emerged Deng Xiaoping.
Yes, Deng. A true veteran of the revolution, but someone who had been purged himself twice during Mao's campaigns. He understood the costs of ideological extremism firsthand.
And he initiated a radical shift away from ideology towards
pragmatism, results, economic growth. His famous saying really captures it all.
the cat quote.
Cat quote. It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice.
Meaning,
let's worry less about the purity of the doctrine, is it truly socialist, and more about whether the policy actually works to improve living standards and strengthen the nation.
so he introduced socialism with Chinese characteristics.
Exactly. A hybrid model. It kept the Communist Party firmly, absolutely in political control. No challenge to that was tolerated. But it opened up the economy dramatically to market forces, private enterprise, foreign investment.
The state wasn't going to disappear, but poverty wasn't acceptable either.
That was the bargain. And the really decisive step towards integrating China into the global economy, the move that changed everything, came later, in 2001.
Joining the World Trade Organization, the WTO.
That was huge. WTO membership guaranteed China more stable access to global markets for its exports, but just as importantly, it triggered massive inflows of foreign capital, technology, and expertise into China.
And the result?
It unleashed the largest and fastest economic transformation in human history, period. Hundreds of millions of people lifted out of absolute poverty in just a couple of decades. It was breathtaking.
So, under Deng and his successors, a new basis for legitimacy emerged, didn't it? Replacing revolutionary zeal.
Absolutely. The New Deal, the new implicit mandate of heaven was this. The party delivers rapidly rising prosperity and national strength. In return, the population accepts continued one-party rule and restrictions on political dissent. Economic openness, political control.
As long as the economy kept growing, as long as life kept getting better, the system held.
And that phase, decades of quite decentralized, almost freewheeling economic growth, laid the groundwork for the current era under Xi Jinping.
Which feels like a shift again, doesn't it? A tightening.
Definitely a tightening. A significant return to stronger, more centralized control. Some observers even call it a kind of modern neo-legalist approach, emphasizing order and state power.
How is that manifested under Xi?
Several ways. There's been a clear consolidation of personal power in his hands. The anti-corruption campaigns, for instance, very popular publicly, but undeniably also serve to sideline potential political rivals.
And then the big constitutional change.
The abolition of presidential term limits in 2018, that was a landmark moment. It effectively removed the established mechanism for leadership succession and opened the door for Xi to remain in power indefinitely.
A level of centralized personal authority not really seen since Mao.
Arguably, yes. But this modern centralization is fused with cutting-edge technology, creating tools for social control and order that previous rulers could only have dreamed of.
Digital control, mass surveillance.
On an unprecedented scale. The sheer number of surveillance cameras is hard to fathom. Estimates are over 700 million now. That's roughly one camera for every two people. It creates this pervasive network of physical monitoring, integrated with facial recognition and other AI.
And it's not just about watching. It feeds into something else, right? The social credit system.
Yes, the SCS. This is even more ambitious. It's not fully unified yet, but the goal is to create a system that rates the trustworthiness of citizens and businesses.
Based on what?
Based on a huge range of data points. Financial behavior, adherence to laws like traffic violations, social conduct, online activity, even things like volunteer work or perceived loyalty to the party's ideals.
And your score effects. What?
It can affect all sorts of things. Access to loans, better jobs, permission to travel, faster internet speeds, or conversely, restrictions on these things if your score is low.
So it's a behavioral grading system designed to nudge or compel people towards state-approved behavior.
Exactly. It's the ultimate high-tech tool for ensuring social conformity and political order. In a sense, you could see it as the 21st century digital version of that ancient legalist ideal. Total uniformity, total obedience, enforced not just by punishment, but by a pervasive, inescapable system of state-managed incentives and disincentives, all powered by data and algorithms.
Okay, that brings us to one of the biggest, thorniest challenges facing China today. How to deal with those massive state-dominated sectors of the economy, the deep water zone of reform, you called it.
Yes, because tinkering here is risky. These sectors, energy, banking, telecoms, transport, are the foundations. Making big changes could destabilize everything.
Let's start by understanding this term commanding heights. Where does that come from?
It actually goes back to Lenin in Soviet Russia around 1922.
Lenin? Really?
Yes, during the New Economic Policy, or NEP. After the disaster of war communism, where the state tried to control everything and failed miserably, Lenin decided to allow some private enterprise back in small businesses, farming for profit.
Which must have been controversial among hardline communists.
Hugely controversial, so Lenin had to justify it. He argued that the state didn't need to own every shop or farm. It only needed to retain control over the commanding heights of the economy.
Meaning the most important strategic sectors.
Exactly. Heavy industry, power generation, transportation, especially railways, banking, foreign trade. His thinking was, if the state controls these, it controls the overall direction of the economy. It could still ensure primitive socialist accumulation, as he put it, even while allowing some market activity downstream.
And China basically adopted a version of this strategy after 1979.
Very much so. Deng Xiaoping's reforms unleashed the private sector in areas like consumer goods, services, export manufacturing. That's where the dynamism came from. But the state through state-owned enterprises, SOEs, kept a firm grip on those upstream commanding heights.
So even today, while the private sector is huge, these SOEs still dominate the core infrastructure.
They do. State assets might be less than 40% of the total economy now, but they control the essential arteries, the power grid, the major banks, the railways, the telecom networks. And this split, this two-track system dynamic private sector downstream, often subsidized state sector upstream, that's where the really deep structural problems arise.
What is the fundamental problem with these state-controlled commanding heights? What makes reforming them so incredibly difficult?
The core issue is market distortion. It stems from the combination of state price controls and massive state subsidies.
How does that work?
Well, to maintain social stability and affordability, key pillars of the party's legitimacy, the state deliberately keeps the prices for essential services artificially low. Think healthcare costs, train tickets, electricity tariffs, basic phone services.
They're subsidized for the public good.
Exactly. But that creates a huge problem. Because the prices are set below the true market cost, the SOEs providing these services often operate at a loss or with very thin margins.
And this is where the soft budget constraint comes in.
Precisely. Because the state needs these services to be provided cheaply for social and political reasons, it implicitly or explicitly guarantees that it will cover the SOE's losses. They know they'll be bailed out.
Which removes the incentive to be efficient.
It massively dampens it. Why strive for efficiency or innovation if you know the state will cover your losses anyway? This creates a moral hazard.
And it also keeps private companies out.
Absolutely. Why would a private investor want to enter a market, say, build a new railway line, if the state-owned competitor is offering tickets at subsidized, unprofitable prices? You can't compete.
So the SOEs maintain their monopolies, often propped up by the state.
Yes, and the result is often service inadequacy despite huge investment. You get overcrowded trains, long waits at public hospitals, sometimes even power shortages, because the pricing signals don't encourage efficient allocation of resources or sufficient investment where it's truly needed. The government ends up bearing an ever-growing fiscal burden, while the state companies lack the hard budget discipline needed for real efficiency gains.
So they're trapped. If they raise prices to market levels to encourage efficiency and private investment,
they risk breaking that social contract of cheap, accessible services. That could trigger widespread public anger, social unrest. It's politically toxic.
But if they don't reform, the inefficiency and the fiscal burden just keep growing.
That's the dilemma. That's the deep water.
Let's look at a concrete example. The railway system seems like a perfect case study for this.
It really is. China Railway Corporation, the CRC, operates the largest high-speed rail network in the world. It's incredibly busy. The numbers are staggering. In 2018, something like 3.375 billion passenger trips. It's a logistical marvel in many ways.
But financially?
Despite that enormous volume, the core transportation segment carrying passengers and freight consistently operates at a net loss.
Because the ticket prices are kept too low? Subsidized.
Exactly. Fares are deliberately kept affordable, especially for conventional lines used by migrant workers and rural populations. High-speed rail might be profitable on some lines, but the overall system loses money on operations.
And just raising prices across the board, we know that's politically explosive.
Extremely explosive. We've seen it elsewhere. You mentioned the French yellow vests triggered partly by a small diesel tax hike, or the protests in Chile over a tiny increase in metro fares.
These things disproportionately hit the less well-off.
Precisely. Migrant workers, people in the countryside, these are core constituencies the party claims to represent. A sudden, sharp increase in train fares could feel like a betrayal and risk major social unrest. So political risk overrides purely economic logic.
Okay, so if you can't just hike prices, how do you fix the underlying problem? How do you make the railways financially sustainable, attract investment, improve service, without causing a political meltdown? The sources suggest a staged approach.
Yes, it has to be done carefully, sequentially. The first step proposed is price differentiation and gradual adjustment. Meaning you don't just raise all fares by, say, 20% overnight. Instead, you implement gradual, incremental annual increases. The suggestion was maybe 8% a year for freight, 5% for passengers for a few years.
Manageable increases. And the differentiation part.
That's key. You charge more where people are willing and able to pay more. So higher prices for first-class seats, for the premium high-speed lines used more by business travelers and the affluent.
But keep prices more stable for basic services.
Yes. And critically, protect necessities that have knock-on effects. For example, the recommendation was to keep coal transportation prices steady. Why? Because coal is the main fuel for power plants. Raising coal transport costs would immediately raise electricity prices, which hits everyone and impacts food costs too.
Smart. Mitigate the chain reaction. The goal is to gently nudge the overall system towards profitability over several years.
Right. The aim is to restore the company's return on equity to a level where it looks like an attractive investment, perhaps within 3 or 4 years, without causing a massive shock.
Okay, so you've improved the financial outlook. What's step 2? This sounds like the really innovative part. Securitization.
This is where you get creative with financing. Instead of trying to sell shares in the entire complex, partially loss-making CRC, you carve out specific, highly profitable, low-risk segments of the network.
Like what?
Think about dedicated railway lines built specifically to transport coal from mines to ports or power plants. One example mentioned is the Qin Shi Huang rail segment. These lines often have long-term contracts, stable volumes, high margins. Their cash flows are predictable and reliable.
Completely different from the national passenger network with its social obligations.
Exactly. So you package these reliable cash flows from these specific profitable lines into securities, basically bonds or similar instruments, and sell them to investors.
Who would buy these?
Long-term conservative investors looking for stable income streams. Pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds. They aren't looking for spectacular growth. They want predictable, low-risk cash flow, which these dedicated lines can provide.
So this brings in huge amounts of private capital.
Without selling off the core passenger network or requiring immediate politically dangerous fare hikes across the board, it provides the funding needed for upgrades and expansion throughout the system.
Clever. And the final step, after pricing reform and securitization?
Governance. Once you have external investors involved, even just in these securitized segments, they bring scrutiny. This creates the political space and the pressure to introduce better corporate governance practices within CRC.
Like what? More transparency?
More transparency, yes. Maybe introducing some internal competition between different lines or divisions, better financial disclosure, more rigorous processes for evaluating new investments to curb some of the politically motivated, potentially wasteful projects that SOEs are sometimes prone to.
So it's a package deal. Fix the pricing gradually, bring in private capital smartly, and then use that presence to drive better management.
That's the proposed path. It's complex, it requires careful sequencing, but it offers a way to navigate the deep water without sinking the ship.
Now, let's shift focus slightly to the financial system itself. Yeah, because it underpins everything, including how these massive SOE investments and subsidies are funded. And here, the dynamic seems different.
It is different. While sectors like railways are subsidized by the state for the public, the financial system, particularly banking, is often structured to subsidize the state at the expense of the public, specifically at the expense of savers.
This is what's called financial repression.
Exactly. It's a set of policies, often administrative, where the government channels funds to itself and its preferred borrowers, typically SOEs that, in a completely free market, would go elsewhere.
And how does it work in practice in China?
One key mechanism is controlling interest rates. Deposit rates offered by the major state-controlled banks are often deliberately kept low.
Lower than inflation sometimes.
Often below inflation and certainly below what a truly competitive market might offer savers.
So ordinary people putting their money in the bank are effectively losing purchasing power or getting a very poor return.
That's the repression part. They are forced, essentially, to accept these low returns on their savings.
And where does the benefit of those low deposit rates go? Who captures that value?
It primarily benefits the borrowers, the state, and the SOEs, who can then access loans from these banks at relatively low interest rates. It provides a vast pool of cheap capital to fund infrastructure projects, industrial expansion, bailouts, whatever the state prioritizes.
So the individual saver is implicitly subsidizing the state's development goals.
That's a good way to put it. It's been a key engine of China's rapid investment-led growth model for decades, sacrificing household saving returns to fuel state-directed investment.
What about the bond market? Hasn't that grown rapidly? Does that offer an alternative?
It has grown incredibly fast, especially since WTO entry. It's now one of the largest in the world, but it still faces significant structural issues.
Such as?
One major issue is liquidity. Many bonds don't trade very often, making it hard to buy or sell large amounts quickly without affecting the price. Another is the credit rating system.
How so?
The domestic rating agencies tend to give very high ratings. Something like 95% of rated bonds are AAA or AA. There's a heavy reliance on implicit government guarantees rather than a true assessment of underlying credit risk. It doesn't effectively differentiate risk.
Which makes it hard for investors to price risk properly.
Exactly. And that, combined with fairly complex regulations, a relative lack of sophisticated halving instruments, and ongoing concerns about capital controls and foreign exchange risk,
means foreign participation is still relatively low, despite potentially attractive yields compared to, say, U.S. or European bonds.
Yes. Foreign investors remain cautious due to the operational complexities, the lack of liquidity in many segments, and worries about getting their money out easily or managing the currency risk. The market is big, but still not fully integrated or efficient by global standards.
Okay, we've looked at the historical quest for order, the complexities of the state-dominated economy. Let's turn now to the future, to the new frontiers where China is competing, technology and global influence.
Right. And the tech race, particularly in semiconductors, is absolutely central to China's ambitions.
The standard narrative we often hear in the West is that China is mainly a copier in tech, always playing catch-up, especially in high-end chips. How accurate is that?
It's an oversimplification. It's true that China definitely lags behind the global cutting edge in certain critical areas.
Like what specifically?
Two key bottlenecks are extreme ultraviolet EUV lithography equipment, the incredibly complex machines needed to print the smallest, most advanced chip features, which are dominated by the Dutch firm ASML, and sophisticated electronic design automation, EDA software, mostly from US companies, which is essential for designing complex chips. China is significantly behind in both.
So they can't make the absolute highest-end chips domestically yet?
Not at the very frontier, no. But it's wrong to dismiss them as just sluggish followers across the board. Innovation is happening, and rapidly in some areas.
Where are we seeing progress?
Well, Chinese firms are getting increasingly competitive in designing logic chips, especially for things like smartphones and AI applications. Companies like Huawei's chip division, HiSilicon, before the US sanctions hit hard, were designing world-class mobile processors. And newer players like Byron Technology have developed powerful GPUs for AI. They're catching up in design capability.
And in manufacturing.
Here, the picture is nuanced. They lag at the leading edge, but they are becoming incredibly dominant in manufacturing what are called legacy or mature node chips.
These are the slightly older, less complex chips.
Exactly. The workhorse chips that go into cars, home appliances, industrial equipment, power management, basically everything except the highest-end smartphones and computers. They might not be glamorous, but they are absolutely essential for the modern economy.
And China is dominating this market.
Increasingly so. Their output of these mature node chips jumped by an astonishing 40% in the first quarter of 2024 alone. They are leveraging state support and scale to become the world's low-cost, high-volume producer of these foundational chips.
So the strategy is self-sufficiency and dominance in the essential, if not the absolute cutting-edge components.
That seems to be a major part of it. And this whole push operates under, as sources say, a shroud of secrecy.
Meaning?
Meaning it's intensely state-directed. Progress, setbacks, specific capabilities, these are often treated almost like state secrets. There's a huge amount of government funding pouring in. Another massive fund, around $40 billion, was announced in 2023. The goal is clearly technological autonomy, breaking free from foreign dependence, especially from the US. It's seen as crucial for national security and future economic strength, order through technological independence.
But this state-centric approach, the subsidies, the push for domestic champions, that inevitably creates friction globally, doesn't it? Especially regarding trade rules.
Oh, absolutely. When China uses state resources to boost its own companies while simultaneously making it difficult for foreign tech firms to access the Chinese market fairly through regulations, standards, or informal barriers, that clashes directly with the principles of non-discrimination and reciprocity that underpin the WTO system it agreed to join.
And other countries are starting to push back more assertively.
Yes, we're seeing a definite shift. The US has implemented export controls on advanced chip technology, and the European Union, for example, is starting to use tools like its International Procurement Instrument, the IPI.
What does that do?
It basically allows the EU to restrict access for companies from a specific country like China to its huge public procurement market, government contracts, if that country isn't providing reciprocal access for EU companies in its own market.
So, tit for tat. If you close your market to our firms, we can close our government contracts to yours.
Essentially, yes. Reciprocity is becoming the name of the game. It's a way for other major economies to try and level the playing field when dealing with China's state capitalist model in strategic sectors like technology.
Okay, so that's the hard power of technology. What about the softer side, trying to win hearts and minds globally? China invests a lot in cultural diplomacy too, right?
Yes, projecting soft power is a major priority for Beijing. There's a conscious effort to counter negative international perceptions and promote an image of China as a sophisticated, ancient, peaceful, and modernizing civilization.
And the main vehicle for this has been the Confucius Institutes.
The CIs have been the flagship initiative for years, launched globally, setting up partnerships with universities and schools abroad. Their stated goal is to promote the Chinese language Mandarin, often touted as the language of the future, and Chinese culture.
Teaching calligraphy, cooking, celebrating festivals, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Designed to be these accessible windows into Chinese culture, fostering goodwill and understanding. Communication channels, essentially.
But how successful have they actually been? They've faced a lot of criticism and pushback, especially in the West.
They have faced significant constraints, particularly in places like the US and perf of the EU. While they've certainly taught Mandarin to many students, they haven't achieved the kind of broad acceptance or positive influence that similar institutions from other countries enjoy.
Like Germany's Goethe Institute or France's Alliance Française. Why the difference?
The core issue really comes down to autonomy, or the perception of it. Confucius Institutes are funded and overseen by an agency linked directly to the Chinese Ministry of Education, often known as Hanban.
So they're seen as arms of the state.
Almost universally, yes. They're widely viewed not as independent cultural or educational bodies, but as instruments of the Chinese government, promoting a particular state-sanctioned narrative and potentially limiting academic freedom on sensitive topics within host universities.
So that deep-seated wariness of centralized state control, which we've been tracing throughout China's history, it actually hinders their ability to project soft power effectively.
Ironically, yes. The very strength and centralization that Beijing relies on domestically makes it harder for its cultural outreach to be perceived as open and trustworthy abroad. Institutions like the Goethe Institute or the British Council operate with a much greater degree of perceived independence from their government's immediate political agendas.
They're seen as more genuinely cultural, less political.
Right. Which makes their message inherently more credible, more easily accepted. China's massive economic clout and long history haven't yet translated easily into the kind of persuasive soft power it seems to desire. It remains a challenge. Hashtag outro.
Well, we've covered an immense amount of ground today. We've really traced that continuous thread through Chinese history, this deep, persistent, sometimes brutal quest for order.
It's a narrative that starts right back with those foundational philosophical debates. You have Confucius arguing for order through moral virtue, good example.
And then Qin Shi Huang imposing order through the iron fist of legalism, through standardization and absolute control. That tension seems to run through everything.
It really does. It's the engine driving so much of Chinese history. Whether you look at the incredible flourishing of the Song Renaissance, built on a new kind of urban and commercial order,
or the intense ideological order demanded by Mao during the revolution,
or even the pragmatic economic order, the bargain struck by Deng Xiaoping prosperity in exchange for political stability. It's always about achieving harmony and national strength through centralized direction and often ruthless efficiency.
And today, it feels like the tools have changed, but the goal remains similar. The modern state uses the engineer's code, the financial regulator's rules, the data analyst's algorithms.
To maintain control over those commanding heights, core industries, finance, and now, increasingly, the critical infrastructure of digital life itself.
So we've talked a lot about the commanding heights of the physical economy, the railways, the power grid. Let's end with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Think about this. Is the modern state's push for centralized control over digital infrastructure, things like AI development, semiconductor supply chains, the social credit system, is this simply the 21st century iteration of the mandate of heaven?
A high-tech quest to maintain order and legitimacy through strength, efficiency, and now information control. trading the emperor's decree for the algorithm's score.
And here's the twist. If the state continues to rely on tools like financial repression, that soft budget constraint forced onto savers to fund this vast, technologically sophisticated system of control.
What happens when that subsidized, potentially inefficient financial foundation meets the relentless, unforgiving reality of global technological competition and geopolitical pressure?
What happens when a soft budget constraint meets hard power technology? That's the paradox, perhaps, that will shape the next chapter in China's long, ongoing quest for order.
Something to definitely keep thinking about.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope you found it valuable. Until next time.
Echoes of the past, visions of tomorrow.